In the heart of a busy airport, where voices echo off polished floors and the world rushes past without pause, a quiet act of kindness ignites a storm no one saw coming. A young black man, kind-faced and humble, sees an old Marine standing alone, shirtless, invisible to everyone but him. While others stare or turn away, he takes off his jacket and drapes it over the veteran's shoulders. But just moments later, a furious CEO storms onto the scene, mistaking compassion for disobedience. In front of everyone, he fires the young man on the spot, humiliates him, and strikes the old veteran, only to discover, far too late, that the man he just punched isn't some forgotten soldier. He's a billionaire, and he's about to remind the whole airport who really holds the power. What happens next will silence the entire terminal. As the young black man, faced like a modern Abraham Lincoln, strong yet gentle, stood frozen in disbelief, the CEO's voice thundered through the airport terminal. "You gave my jacket to that beggar?" he spat, jabbing a finger toward the old Marine whose wrinkled chest still bore scars that told stories of sacrifice no one cared to hear. Guests stopped eating. Security glanced. Over. Phones tilted up, already recording, but no one moved. The young man, still calm, replied, "Sir," he looked cold. "It didn't seem right to leave him like that." The CEO's lip curled. "You don't get paid to feel, you get paid to serve. You're fired, and get out before I call security." He turned to the old Marine. "And you, get out of my airport. Now!" The Marine didn't flinch. He simply looked up, weathered, wise eyes locking with the CEO's. "You're making a mistake, son," the old man said, voice low and even. That's when the CEO snapped. In one rage-fueled motion, he shoved the old man, his fist connecting square with his shoulder. The Marine stumbled slightly, but stood tall again, his dignity unshaken. Gasps echoed across the terminal. The young worker rushed to his side, and then everything changed. From the corner of the airport, a woman in a tailored suit ran forward, holding an earpiece and tablet. "Mr. Carter," she shouted. "Mr. Carter, please forgive the delay. Your jet is fueled and waiting. We didn't recognize you, sir." The CEO blinked, confused. "Who the hell is Mr. Carter?" She turned to him with the color drained from her face. "That man, that's William Carter, decorated Marine, founder of Patriot Holdings. Net worth $3.4 billion. The terminal fell into stunned silence. The guests who once stared in judgment now shrank back into their chairs. The security guards who were walking toward the scene suddenly stopped. The old Marine adjusted the jacket the young man had given him. "I built this airport," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "My company owns 62% of the international terminals. And I see now, the people running it have no heart." He turned to the young man. "What's your name, son?" "Darius, sir." "Well, Darius." Mr. Carter smiled. "How'd you like to run this terminal with me?" The CEO's jaw dropped. Darius's eyes widened. "Me? You showed more leadership with one act of kindness than this man has with a lifetime of power." Carter looked to the stunned crowd. "Remember this day, because this young man just got promoted and this fool just lost everything." And right there, under the bright lights of Gate B12, the roles reversed. Kindness had spoken louder than rank, and the airport would never forget the day compassion fired back, with power and purpose. A heavy hush blanketed the terminal, the kind of silence that only falls when justice flips the room upside down. The CEO, once towering with arrogance, now stood small, mouth parted, eyes darting around for someone, anyone, to back him up. But the guests who had once watched in passive amusement now looked away, ashamed. No one stood with him. Mr. William Carter, the billionaire Marine, turned slowly, his combat-worn boots echoing softly as he faced the terminal crowd. "You all watched," he said, not with bitterness, but with clarity. "You saw a man alone, a veteran. And you judge me not by my service but by my clothes, my skin, my silence. That's not how a nation built on freedom treats its soldiers. That's not how decent people treat each other. A young child in the crowd tugged her father's sleeve and whispered, "Is he a hero, Daddy?" The father, eyes wet with quiet guilt, nodded slowly. "Yes, baby, he is." Carter turned back to Darius, the young man who gave away his only jacket not for praise, not for show, but simply because it was the right thing to do. "You have something most people in this building lost," Carter said. "Humanity. You saw me when no one else did." Darius's voice trembled. "I didn't do it for anything back, sir. I couldn't let you stand there like that." Mr. Carter smiled. "That's exactly why I'm trusting you." He turned to his assistant. "Put Darius through executive onboarding, full benefits, triple his current salary, and tell corporate, this terminal's under new leadership." The assistant nodded sharply and immediately began typing on her tablet. Suddenly, reporters who'd overheard the commotion began pushing forward. Cameras flashed. Microphones appeared. "Mr. Carter, how do you respond to what just happened? Do you plan to press charges on the CEO? What does this mean for the company?" Mr. Carter raised one hand, silencing the crowd with a simple gesture of calm power. "I don't need revenge," he said. "That man," pointing at the disgraced CEO, "fired someone for showing compassion. But what he really fired was his own integrity." The CEO finally broke, stumbling forward. "Please, Mr. Carter, I didn't know it was you. Carter didn't even look at him. "You didn't need to know it was me. You just needed to know it was a person. That's where you failed." Security, now acting on Carter's orders, escorted the CEO out. He passed through the same doors he once swaggered through, now disgraced, humiliated, and jobless. The irony was crushing. Carter placed a hand on Darius's shoulder. "Let's take a walk. I want to hear your story." As they walked side by side through the terminal, guests began to rise, one by one, clapping, not for a billionaire, not for a power move, but for a moment of truth. A moment that reminded everyone what real strength looks like. And as they walked into the golden light filtering through the glass walls of the terminal, past security, past the restaurants, past the gates, one thing was clear. Kindness never needs a title, but today, it earned one. As Mr. Carter and Darius walked through the terminal, the crowd slowly parted for them, not out of fear, but out of reverence. For once, the airport wasn't ruled by rushed itineraries or impatient gate changes. For once, it stood still for the kind of moment people tell their children about. The murmurs of applause turned into something stronger. Travelers rose from their seats. Pilots stepped out of cockpits. Flight attendants placed hands over their hearts. Veterans in the waiting area stood at attention. Even janitors leaned on their mops and watched, their eyes saying, "Thank you, and how?" At the very center of it all, Darius, a young man once overlooked, once scolded, once fired, walked beside a billionaire like they were equals. Because in that moment, they were. Mr. Carter glanced sideways at him. "Tell me something, Darius. What made you step up? Most people wouldn't have." Darius shrugged humbly. "My mom always told me, if you see someone standing alone, stand with them, even if it costs you something." "I didn't have much, sir. But I had a jacket." "He had nothing." Carter smiled. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She raised me to lead with my heart. Even when the world laughs at that." "Well," Carter said, pausing in the middle of the terminal, turning to face Darius fully, "the world isn't laughing now. It's listening. And that jacket you gave me, you may not know it, but you were wearing something even more valuable. Character. That's the fabric this country is missing." Just then, Carter turned to the assistant who had been trailing behind, still on her tablet. "Get the press on this. But not for me. For him. Let the world know who Darius is. I want his story. In every paper, Every network, every city. Darius's eyes widened. Why, sir? Because one man's quiet kindness can echo louder than 1,000 shouting egos, Carter said. And if we amplify the right voices, maybe we can change this country, one heart at a time. A small boy approached them, nervously holding a paper airplane. Sir, he whispered, looking at Darius. Can I give you this? My dad said you're a real hero. Darius knelt down and took the paper plane with a gentle smile. Thank you, little man. But I just did what anyone should. Do. The boy grinned and ran back to his parents. Mr. Carter leaned closer and whispered, Heroes never say they're heroes. That's how you know they're real. As the two men reached the VIP lounge, Carter gestured to the double-glass doors, guarded by private security. Come inside, Darius. Let's talk about your future. This isn't just a job anymore. This is a mission. Darius hesitated. What do I even say in a place like that? You don't have to say anything, Carter replied. You just have to be you. And as the glass doors opened, bathed in light and silence, the entire terminal watched history shift. Not with explosions, not with speeches, but with one jacket, one hand of compassion, and the unshakable truth that when dignity walks quietly, even power must rise to meet it. And so the young man who once served guests now served purpose. Inside the VIP lounge, the air was cooler, quieter. Walls of glass framed the runway where jets taxied like silent giants. Plush leather chairs, polished mahogany tables, and hushed conversations filled the space. But none of that mattered to Darius. What echoed loudest in his mind wasn't the silence of wealth. It was the roar of what had just happened outside, the applause, the humiliation, the justice. He stood still for a moment, unsure whether he belonged in a place like this. Mr. Carter noticed. You're thinking, I don't fit in here, right? Darius nodded. Yes, sir. Carter stepped to a side wall and pointed to a framed photo. In it, a younger version of himself stood barefoot, covered in mud, clutching a folded American flag in one hand and a duffel bag in the other. 20 years ago, I stood right where you're standing, he said, wearing torn boots and doubt on my back. I didn't belong either. Until I realized, places don't define you. Purpose does. Darius swallowed the lump in his throat. You really built all this? Carter nodded. Brick by brick. Not with money first, but with values, honor, service, respect. Somewhere along the way, people forgot those words matter more than titles and suits. He turned, locking eyes with the young man. That's why I want you beside me. This terminal. It's more than flights and food courts. It's a symbol of how we treat each other when no one's watching. Darius looked down at his hands, once handing out trays, now holding opportunity. But sir, I've never led a team, never managed a business. You led today, Carter interrupted. You stood alone and did what was right. That's leadership in its rawest, truest form. Skills we can train. Heart? That's rare. Just then, a tablet buzzed. Carter's assistant leaned in. Sir, the story's already gone viral. Over 5 million views in the last 30 minutes. Hashtags trending. Jacket of honor, a Marine billionaire. Darius deserves better. Carter smirked. The world's hungry for good again. Outside, the terminal buzzed like a beehive awakened. News crews arrived. Passengers spoke in hushed reverence. Social media exploded with screenshots of Darius handing the jacket to the Marine, side by side with headlines like, a billionaire, a jacket, and the kindness that changed everything. Inside, Carter handed Darius a sleek envelope. What's this? Your new contract, he said simply. And a card. Darius opened it. Inside, welcome to Patriot Holdings, Senior Director of Terminal Experience, because character deserves a seat at the table. Tears stung Darius's eyes. "Sir, I don't have the words." "You don't need them," Carter replied. "Just keep doing what you did today. Be the man who sees the invisible, who stands for what's right when no one else will." And with that, Carter extended his hand. Darius shook it, not as a worker and employer, but as equals. And as the sun began to set outside, casting golden streaks across the lounge floor, the world outside the glass shifted, not because of a policy or a speech, but because one man gave away his jacket, and another man gave him the world in return. In a place built for departures, something beautiful arrived. Respect. Redemption. And a reminder, greatness doesn't always wear a name tag. As the handshake lingered, the weight of the moment settled in like a slow sunrise, warm, powerful, undeniable. Darius, still in his faded work shoes and short-sleeved uniform, now stood taller, steadier. His posture, once reserved and humble, had shifted ever so slightly. He wasn't just standing in a VIP lounge. He was standing in his purpose. Carter motioned for him to follow. "Come, let me show you where we're going." They walked through a private corridor, the kind that led to restricted areas of the terminal few ever saw. It was lined with framed photos, soldiers in combat gear, airline staff with arms around each other, old black and white images of pilots shaking hands with civil rights leaders. "This hallway," Carter said, "is the legacy wing. It tells the story of people who stood for something bigger than themselves." Darius stopped in front of one frame. It was a photograph of Rosa Parks. Another, of Martin Luther King Jr. standing beside war veterans. Another still, of a young black pilot saluting a line of nurses during World War II. These people, they didn't have perfect credentials or power either, Carter said. They had principles, and that's what I saw in you today. Darius stared, in silence, awestruck. "I never imagined I'd be part of anything like this." Carter gave a knowing nod. "That's because the system never teaches young black men like us to imagine this as our place. But let me be clear. This is exactly your place." Suddenly, they reached a double set of glass doors labeled Patriot Vision Command, Future Leadership Division. Carter placed his hand on a sensor, unlocking the doors. Inside, the room looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. Digital displays, global airport dashboards, walls of live feed monitors showing terminals from New York to Nairobi. Everything we build, Carter said, starts here. And starting today, you're part of it. Darius stepped inside. For a second, it didn't feel real. But then, he heard a voice behind him. It was a woman, suited sharply, maybe in her 50s. "You're the kid with the jacket?" He turned, startled. "Yes, ma'am," she grinned. "Welcome aboard. We've been waiting for someone like you." Others looked up and nodded, people of every color, age, background. And Darius realized he didn't just belong here. He was needed here. Carter stood beside him. "You've got a choice now, Darius. You can go back to serving guests at Gate 9, or you can help shape the way every airport in this country treats people, with dignity, with humanity." The words hit like thunder in his chest. "I want to be part of that change," Darius said. "I want to build something." Carter smiled. "Then let's build it." Outside, the airport continued its rhythm. Planes landing, announcements blaring, people rushing, but something had changed beneath the surface. Not in structure, in spirit. A young man gave away his jacket. An old man gave him a mission. And the world, watching from behind their screens and phones, learned something vital. Real power isn't in who you control. It's in who you lift, and on that day, in that terminal, under bright lights and brighter truth, the world didn't just witness a promotion, it witnessed a promise that kindness still wins. Word of the event spread like wildfire, not just through the airport, not just online, but into the veins of the country itself. News stations replayed. the footage of Darius draping his jacket over the shoulders of the quiet, shirtless old man. Commentators called it the airport awakening. Social media dubbed him the jacket gentleman. But back inside Patriot Holdings' leadership command, Darius wasn't chasing headlines. He was adjusting to something much deeper, a seat at the table of change. Within 48 hours, the boardroom was buzzing. Carter had called a full executive meeting, not the usual crowd of buttoned-up elites, but a carefully selected mix of ground staff, veterans, janitors, flight attendants, and even a cafeteria worker who'd once bought breakfast for a homeless traveler. From now on, Carter told them, policy comes from the people, from those who serve on the ground, not just those in the clouds. Darius, now seated beside him with a notepad and tablet, listened with quiet focus. When Carter turned to him and said, "You've got the floor," a wave of silence swept through the room. "Me?" But he rose, nervous, yes, but with fire in his chest. "I'm not a businessman," Darius began. "I'm not some expert in aviation or finance, but I do know how it feels to be invisible. I know what it's like to work 16 hours straight and still be treated like you're disposable. What happened at that terminal? That's not just about me. That's about every single person who's ever been overlooked for doing the right thing instead of the convenient thing." He paused, eyes meeting theirs. "If we want to change how airports feel to the people inside them, we start by changing how we see each other." The room erupted into applause. Not polite corporate claps, real, raw, rising applause. Carter stood and placed his hand on Darius's shoulder. "This is what leadership looks like, and this is what legacy feels like." Weeks passed, and the results began to show. Patriot Holdings rolled out a new initiative called the Jacket Code, a policy mandating training in compassion, dignity, and community-first principles for all staff. Across terminals nationwide, posters went up with a simple image. A folded jacket over a chair and the words, "If you see someone alone, stand with them." Travelers noticed. So did employees. Smiles grew more genuine. "Sir" and "ma'am" returned to service conversations. Airport managers, once obsessed with clock-punching efficiency, began asking better questions. Who was kind today? Who went unseen? Recognition programs shifted from profit metrics to human impact. And Darius? He didn't just rise, he soared. He became the youngest vice president of community operations in company history. But he still wore his old name tag, pinned to his new blazer. Not out of nostalgia, but as a reminder, where you start isn't who you are. How you serve is who you become. One afternoon, weeks later, Carter called him to the roof of the terminal. A helicopter was waiting. "Where are we going, sir?" "Home," Carter said. "There's someone I want you to meet." The chopper flew over cities, highways, rivers. They landed in a quiet southern town, in front of a modest brick house with a porch swing and two flags, American and Marine. Corp out stepped a woman in a faded apron, wiping her hands on a towel. "Mom," Carter said, smiling like a boy again. "This is the young man I told you about, the one who reminded me what honor looks like." Darius extended his hand, but she pulled him into a hug. "Thank you," she whispered. "Not just for helping my son, for helping the world remember its heart." And in that still afternoon air, under the wide stretch of American sky, Darius knew something deeper than titles, deeper than viral fame. He had become the kind of man his own mother would have been proud of. The kind of leader this country still had hope in. The kind of story people pass down, not for drama but for truth. Because in the end, a jacket didn't just warm a veteran's back. It sparked a fire that lit the whole nation. And all it took was one young man refusing to look away. Months rolled on. Airports transformed from cold mechanical passageways to places with soul, where veterans were offered handshakes instead of stares, where young workers were seen as leaders in waiting, not labor to be ignored. The jacket code spread beyond airports, to train stations, bus terminals, even public schools. Cities began hosting compassion days, and stories of everyday kindness began flooding the news. The ripple Darius created had become a wave, a quiet revolution born not from power, but from presence. And yet, through it all, Darius remained the same man who had given his jacket away. Not for recognition, but because it was right. He still visited the terminal every morning before heading into meetings. He still greeted every janitor by name. He still carried a folded jacket in his office, framed in glass, beneath a plaque that read, "Honor is what you do when no one is watching." One evening, as dusk bathed the airport in orange glow, Darius stood by a window overlooking the runway. Flights came and went. Families hugged. Soldiers walked quietly through gates. A young employee approached him, nervous, wide-eyed, uniform, slightly oversized. "Mr. Darius? Can I ask something?" "Of course." The boy shuffled his feet. "Did you ever think, back then, that any of this would happen?" Darius smiled gently. "No. I just thought about what my mother would want me to do if she saw someone left in the cold. That's all." The young man nodded slowly. "Well, I think you saved a lot more than just one man that day." Darius placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then it was never just about a jacket. It was about never letting people forget how powerful it is to see each other." The boy nodded and walked off, a little taller. As the night descended and runway lights flickered beneath the stars, Darius took a deep breath. He was no longer just a story. He had become a symbol, a living reminder that greatness isn't born in boardrooms or stages, but in the silent moments where kindness meets courage. In a world that moves fast, where noise drowns empathy and titles too often define worth, one young man stopped to care. He didn't give his jacket to be remembered, but now the world will never forget, because when compassion takes the lead, even a single act can change the entire gate.